Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the YouTube channel grecochess, the channel of chess. We continue presenting the games from the final round of the Underwater Moonlight Tournament. This is an online tournament in the platform of chess.com that is organized by one of our subscribers, Zanila, from Italy. The tournament started with 81 players, and now we are at the final round with 6 players having qualified. One of them withdrew, so 5 players remain. And these are the following: AMMT from Indonesia, pigio74 from Italy, Maxim Govoruka from Ukraine, TsiNanFu from Greenland, and Steamed Rocket from Australia. These 5 players will play a total of 20 games between them. Until now, we have presented 5 of these games. 8 have been completed, and now we are going to present the 6 of these games. We're going to present the games as they conclude with the order they have concluded. And the game we're going to present today is pigio74 from Italy with the white pieces versus TsiNanFu from Greenland with the black pieces. Until now, both players have not started very well. pigio74 has 2 losses, and TsiNanFu has also 2 losses. So it's very important for these players to be able to win the games between them to have chances to do well in the tournament. Currently, in fact, I mean after the games I have presented, AMMT and Maxim Govorucha are doing the best, have only wins. But let's share the screen with the page of chess.com, with the analysis board of chess.com, and let's hope we get the correct page. And here we are. Once again, you've seen what I have also noticed at the previous videos. To begin with, we are only showing part of the screen and not the entire because we don't want to spoil it. We don't want to show the rest of the game and the remaining moves. That would happen if I show the entire screen. Also notice that the position is not the usual starting position because this is a thematic tournament, meaning that players have agreed that they'll start from this position. You notice that the ratings, pigio74 has rating of 1281 and TsiNanFu 1479, which makes TsiNanFu the favorite, higher rating. But that doesn't mean too much always. Many surprises have happened. And also here on this column, you're going to see the computer evaluation. If you see a number at the bottom left, white is doing better. The top left, black is doing better. And currently it is 0.00, meaning they are starting from an even position. And pigio74 is ready for his 7th move. He starts with the move number 7, and no surprise here. If you push your pawn to g3, there is only one reason to do it, and this is for the fianchetto and bishop going to g2. You see a little booklet? This means that is a book move that has been extensively analyzed and discussed in the opening theory and should come as no surprise. Currently, white, after this move, exerts pressure on this diagonal from A8 to H1, the long diagonal. And of course, black is not going to leave it that way. He's going to contest it. So TsiNanFu plays the expected move, pawn to d5, which closes diagonal, because otherwise, if this knight went anywhere, the rook would be lost. In previous games that we showed, most of the times, knight goes to e5, another book move for white, but pigio74 decides to do something different. Takes the d5 pawn with his pawn, and this is also a book move, and TsiNanFu replies with a knight to d5. This is not a book move any longer. It is an excellent move. The best move would have been to use the pawn on e6 to take on d5. This gives a very small advantage of 0.3 to pg74. That means nothing at this point. Short castling for pg74 and knight to d7 for TsiNanFu. The two sides develop their pieces to be ready for the fight. Next move, another developing move, knight to c3 for pg74. And now TsiNanFu moves his knight from d7 to f6. Computer thinks it's inaccuracy. The comment of the coach says the best option was to castle to the same side as your opponent. Well, the coach unfortunately does not explain too much because you can always do it later. I think the real reason is because you don't want in the opening to move the same piece more than once unless you have to. And the knight on d7 was not threatened by anything, so it was a waste of a tempo to move it to f6. And after 10 moves, what is the score? pg74 is leading by 0.8, still a very small advantage. Continuing, rook to e1 for pg74. Computer thinks inaccuracy. Would rather have the knight go to e5. Pawn to c6 for TsiNanFu. Also inaccuracy. The problem with the pawn on c6 is that it's not protected by anything. The knight on d5 is already protected twice, doesn't need more protection. Pawn to e4 for pg74. Threatens the knight on d5, and knight goes back to c7. Computer would rather have the knight take the knight on c3. Pawn to e5 for pg74. Yes, it attacks the knight, but creates a weakness on the square d5. That's why one has to be careful before moving pawns. Most of the times when a pawn moves, creates a weakness in a square next to that. Both d5 and the 5 now become weak because there is no pawn on e4 to attack, to control them. And TsiNanFu takes advantage, places the knight on d5, the square that is not controlled any longer by the e-pawn. Pawn to h4 for pg74, that feels that he's ready for an attack along the king side. Many times this works. Computer doesn't think it works now. That's why considers it an inaccuracy. That's what the question mark followed by the exclamation point mean. But let's see if the computer is right or not. Queen to d7, another inaccuracy for TsiNanFu. Knight to d5, one inaccuracy after the other, pg74, and the pawn, c-pawn takes. Computer thinks a mistake, would rather have the knight take on d5. We finished 15 moves, and by now, the advantage of pg74, as you see here, is 1.4. And with the second decimal digit is 1.49. Starts becoming important. And now, pg74 sends his pawn to b4. The white X in a red circle means it's a miss. Computer would prefer the knight to go to g5 and starts exerting pressure on the f7 and h7 pawns near the black king. Bishop to c4 for TsiNanFu. Nice location for the bishop, still controls the diagonal from a6 to f1. In addition, controls a much bigger diagonal from a2 to d5. And also this bishop is sort of an outpost because no b or d pawns can attack it on c4, especially the b pawn that has been moved to b4. Pawn to a4 for pg74, pushes the end the b pawns. Tries to attack along the queen side and short castling for TsiNanFu. Now the computer thinks it's inaccuracy. Before it wanted it. And the coach says this is not the right idea without explaining which idea would have been the right. Maybe the pawn to b6, but it's going to be taken. We'll take it with the queen, with the knight, or the queen, or the bishop. Doesn't explain too much. But let's continue. Pawn to h5. pg74 wants to advance his pawn as much as possible and doesn't care if the computer thinks it's an inaccuracy. And TsiNanFu feels that there is something coming and wants to stop or at least lower this attack and places the pawn to f5. Mistakes the computer. Computer would rather have the pawn go to h6 from h7 to h6, you see the green arrow here, and stop the advancement of the h pawn. At this point, pigio74 will take with an en passant, and TsiNanFu will take back with the bishop. Computer sees okay, good move, but would rather have it with the pawn. You don't want to leave your G file exposed. That's why I didn't take the pawn, but and also now the bishop can go away and the rook on f8 is quite powerful. While if there's a pawn, it's not so easy to take it away. But let's continue. Bishop to f4 for pigio74, the best move, and rook to c8 for TsiNanFu. We've completed 20 moves, and what is the score? pigio74 has an important advantage of 2.8. But let's continue the game, because important or non-important, many times games have changed when you least expect it. pigio74 will send his bishop to h3 to control more square, because on g2 it might dream of taking the rook on a8, but since the rook is not there anymore, where can the bishop go and quote-unquote harass the black rook? That's on c8, it has to go to h3. Rook now goes to e8 for TsiNanFu, and unfortunately the bishop cannot go out of the board to continue attacking the rook on e8. What does pigio74 do? Pawn sends goes to b5, controls the a6 and c6 squares. Queen goes to f7 for TsiNanFu. Pawn to h6 for pigio74. This lonely h-pawn that started with h4 and h5 that were inaccuracies on the computer now goes to h6, which the computer thinks a good move. A good move means just a K move, nothing superior. But what can TsiNanFu do? If he takes it, he opens the G file, and then pigio74 may try to put a queen or a rook and place, especially the rook, the black king in danger. But what if he doesn't take it? Then it's going to create a wonderful hole on g7 that maybe the white queen can use later for a mating attack. So finally, TsiNanFu decides to push his pawn to g5. Good moves, the computer would rather have the take the h6. If you're going to weaken your position, either way, rather at least win a pawn, perhaps. Bishop to d6 for pigio74 and attacks the rook on f8 that has nowhere to go. How to defend? TsiNanFu finds the only move that can protect the rook by placing the bishop on e7. And the computer doesn't like it. The computer would rather have the pawn go from e6 to e5 and sacrifice the exchange. And now you may be wondering, isn't pigio74 winning an entire piece, the rook on c7, that cannot be protected any longer by the queen on f7? This is because the bishop came between them. Yes and no. Yes, because really pigio74 is going to take the knight on c7, but on the other side, TsiNanFu retaliates and takes the knight on f3 with a queen. Computer doesn't like it. Computer thinks it's an inaccuracy and says, the code says this leads to losing a queen. Yes, but queens will be exchanged. So yes, both sides will lose their queens. What else can black do to stay with even material? We finish. That's a problem the code unfortunately doesn't explain too much. I'm going to read it from time to time, but it doesn't explain, at least as much as just student would like. We finished 25 moves, and what's the score? 5.7 for pigio74. Why? Material is the same, but the black king is very, very weak. Has no pawns, has anyone near it. h7 is the nearest one. And the white is little by little trying to point his pieces towards the black king. But let's continue. What's going to happen? Now we're going to have exchange of queens. Computer would rather have the bishop take on e6. But this will happen now. Bishop takes on e6, and now pg74 has an extra pawn. Where can the king go? Not too many places. If it goes to h8, it is very, very dangerous because the bishop can go from c7 to e5. Yes, the check can be blocked, but we are in the dangerous zone. That is why TsiNanFu prefers to send the king to f8. King to g2 for pg74 attacks the rook on f3. And rook to d3 for TsiNanFu mistakes as a computer. Why mistake? Let's see if we can find it. First of all, pg74 sends a bishop to e5. And so these two wonderful bishops of white, the e5 and d6, control a lot of squares near the black king. Look at all the squares. To say nothing of d7, and also control the second time by the pawn on h6. TsiNanFu replies the bishop to b4 and attacks the rook on e1. And now, pg74 for the time being disregards the threat for his rook and instead checks from g7. Of course, the h6 pawn protects it, so the king cannot just take the d7 bishop. And now at this point, TsiNanFu has only one legal move. King to e7. And this sign that you see here, the white arrow inside the grayish bluish circle means only move. The move is forced. But the good thing for pg74 for white is that the bishop on e6 can go anywhere and it's a discovered check. And the question is where? The computer is going to suggest d5, and the advantage with this is first you win the pawn, and after king goes anywhere, you also win the bishop on c4. The problem is that by doing so, you may lose your rook on e1. Let's see what happens and what does the computer think. Yes, the computer, as I said before, wants a bishop to go to d5, and pg74 instead sent his rook to e5. Why? Because on e1 it was attacked by the b4 bishop. Computer doesn't like it, thinks it's inaccuracy, and wants directly the bishop from e6 to take the pawn on d5 and have a discover check. But before this move is done, we completed 30 moves. 5.7 is advantage for pg74, quite an important one. Now it goes down a little bit to 4.2 after this move of pg74. Let's continue. King goes to d6. Now the bishop on e6 is under threat because if white does nothing, rook takes it, and if rook takes it from e5, then rook takes rook. The good thing for white is that if the bishop disappears, then the rook on e5 is not lost because protected twice, once by the bishop on g7 and once by the pawn on d4. So what this means is that white must move his bishop, and the question is where? Sends it to f7. Computer would rather have it to f5 to attack the rook on d3. Rook takes, so we change rooks now on e5. King goes to, this is of course with a check. King goes to d7 for TsiNanFu. Bishop to g8 for pg74 that attacks the pawn on h7. If you notice, if the pawn on h7 disappears, the pawn on h6 becomes a passed pawn, and not just any passed pawn, but 2 squares away from promotion. Will it happen? Let's see. Let's see how TsiNanFu will react. He sends his bishop to c3. Inaccuracies as the computer, because white's main objective has nothing to do with the rook on a1 that in any case has not moved at all from the start of the game. White's objective is remove the h7 pawn, take the bishop away from h7, and 2 moves, then the h6 pawn is promoted. But will it happen? Let's see. First of all, bishop takes on h7, no surprise for pg74. At the very minimum, wins the pawn even if the h6 pawn fails to promote. TsiNanFu, let's take the bishop while we can. There's an expression, if you're going to die, at least die with your stomach full. So TsiNanFu takes the bishop and temporarily is ahead by +3 units. But the computer says that pigio74 is ahead by 8.0. After 35 moves, pigio74 is ahead by 8.0, even though materially he's down by 3. Why does this happen? One reason is think safety. Clearly, the white king is safer than black, but I think more important is because the a6 pawn is very near promotion. Who can stop it? Let's see. But first, pg74 is going to play, and he checks on f5, not because he hopes that the check is going to be a mate or will lead to a mate, but because he wins a tempo. Now, pg74 cannot do anything to stop the pawn at h6. Must move his king somewhere, and the king is not near the pawn. You see that this pawn here defines a square. And if the king would be in the square, at least the king, in theory, could stop the pawn. In practice, I don't think even that would be easy because of the two bishops that block a lot of squares for the black king to come. But the fact that the king is outside the square means that even without these two bishops, the h6 pawn would promote. But let's see what happens. King goes to e7, be as near the square as possible. Pawn to h7, now the square becomes smaller. And the black king cannot enter there. So TsiNanFu decides to place his rook to d1 in accuracy in the computer, hoping that maybe he could have a check from f1, and it's not possible at all. The bishop on a1 cannot even help. But it doesn't seem to be this case. And at this point, the pawn goes to h8, the white pawn. pg74 promotes the pawn, and now you can see the white flag in the red circle, meaning that TsiNanFu resigned. You see m4 now, meaning under best game, pg74 is going to checkmate in 4 moves, even if it's not very obvious. Because if the queen goes to f6, for example, the king can only go in somewhere like e8 or f8, and then with the help of the bishops, white is mating. Because what's happening is that the black has a rook and two bishops, and none of them can do anything to help. The bishop is blocked by its own pawn on d5. The rook go where near go where the bishop is blocking the rook. The rook cannot go to h1 because of the king on d2. The bishop on e1 is blocked by the pawn on d4 with the bishop on e5, and that is why TsiNanFu resigned, and pg74 has his first win in the final round. And we're going to stop the sharing, and we're going to share the other screen to show to you the computer evaluation. What does the computer think about the overall game? Here we are. Accuracy, 871. 81.8% for pg74, 67.5 for TsiNanFu. There's a difference. They played as if pg74 had a rating of 1600, above his 1281, while TsiNanFu with a rating of 850, below his 1479. One great move for pg74, 2 versus 1 book moves for pg74, 12 versus 5 best moves for pg74, excellent 6 versus 5 for TsiNanFu, good 7 versus 4 for TsiNanFu. Inaccuracies, 7 pg74, 8 inaccuracies, 8 TsiNanFu. 3 mistakes for TsiNanFu, 1 miss for pg74, and no blunders. That's what the computer thinks about the game overall. As we mentioned before, there are 2 more games that have been completed and we have not yet shown to you. And these are the following. The first is the revanche. What we mean by revanche is the other game where the same players will play each other, TsiNanFu and pg74, but this time pg74 has the white piece. Excuse me. Now, TsiNanFu, I'm sorry, will have the white pieces, and pg74 will have the black. And after that, what is the next game? AMMT versus Maxim Govoruka, the two leading players. They have already played once with each other, with Maxim Govoruka winning when he had the white. Now AMMT will have the white pieces. Let's see what's going to happen. And this game might determine who is going to win the tournament. As I mentioned before, after the withdrawal of one player, we have 5 remaining. They'll play a total of 20 games, 5 times 4. We have covered 6 of them. 2 more have been completed. The next 2 videos will be these 2 games. And after that, if nothing new emerges, we are going to return to the bots. And let's share the screen with the bots. Here we are. If you follow from the beginning, we start with the beginner bots, then the intermediate, and now the advanced. There are 20 of them, and we have been able to survive 16 of them. The latest one being Lee from Taiwan with a rating of 2000. And now it's time to play with the second of the 2000 rated bots, Charles from England. This is going to be in the plans for the future. And then we have one more bot of 2000 and 2 bots of 2100 to complete the advanced bots. And then it's the master bots. But that's it for now. Thanks to all the viewers, the subscribers, the likes, and the comments. If you're interested, you may want to see our short videos where we are participating in the puzzle rush for the 3-minute time limit. How many can we do? You may try to play with us, see if you can do these puzzles. Of course, you have the luxury to pause the videos anytime you like and spend as much time as possible trying to solve these puzzles. And once again, this is the Greco Chess YouTube channel. I'm your host, Harilas Aniziris. To all of you, goodbye.